Genesis chapter 6, verse 22, where we see things come to a conclusion and Noah obeys God. And we're going to pause after this. We're going to pivot to a psalm for a bit if you've been following along. And then in a few days, we'll come back and press on in the Noah narrative with Genesis chapter 7. So let's dig in with this final verse of the chapter. Okay, epoiesen Noe panta, hasa enetelata auto, kyrios hotheos, hutos epoiesen. Well, this Kai here is linking us back, saying, okay, we're driving to a conclusion of the narrative. Noah here is the subject, and God's been largely the subject up until now, the one speaking. And epoiesen here is just a standard third singular aorist, active indicative with the E on the front end, the sigma here. You got the lengthening in the third singular ending. So, and Noah did panta, he did everything. Then we have a little appositional clause here, I would argue, further defining what this panta is. Hasa, as much as. Enetelata is from entelomai, and that's a third singular aorist middle indicative. That means to command. And command him, but who's doing it? Kyrios hot theos. So as much as the Lord God commanded him. So he is doing full obedience. Now, if you look up the nominative here, the kyrios hot theos, in your English Bible derived from the Masoretic text, you'll see that the Masoretic and the Vulgate actually and the Syriac Peshitta just have God. In other words, the source here would just have theos. Now that's interesting because we've seen previously numerous times throughout Greek Genesis that often the Hebrew will have the tetragrammaton, Yahweh or the Lord, and the Septuagint will add theos, but here that process appears to be working in reverse. Now, what's further sort of problematizing all this is that all the targums of Genesis, onkelos and so forth, have not theos, or the equivalent of God there, but they have Lord, typically spelled just 3 yods, or sometimes a yod, vav, yod. So that's kind of an interesting way they spell it in Aramaic. And so you see that you actually have both traditions at play. One strand of the tradition just has God, one strand just has Lord, and the Old Greek puts them both together. So that's pretty interesting in my opinion. So we have the Lord God commanded him. Now, if you look this up in the Göttingen edition, you'll see that the omission of kyrios, and I can refer you back to the Göttingen videos, the fact that kyrios is omitted shows up in a boatload of manuscripts and various traditions and textual families and so forth, and that reflects the Masoretic. And so just important to realize what the critical editions render here, but a lot of evidence for the omission of the kyrios, but the harder reading in a certain sense because it goes against all the other traditions, if you will, is to have both kyrios and theos. Let's wrap up the verse then. Hutos epoiesen, in this manner he did. And this epoiesen here is being repeated. Noah is still the subject. So in other words, Noah thusly did. He did everything that God commanded. And that is a lovely way Genesis 6 ends. If you remember back early verses of Genesis 6, mankind has fallen into total disobedience, sons of God, committing sin with the daughters of man, and there's a debate about what exactly that refers to, and the whole Watchers theory versus the line of Abel theory that I covered in a prior video. Either way, it's bleak. God makes a decision to judge all of the earth, but Noah stands out. He is someone who is righteous before God. God gives him the commandments, and now we see him do it. So in contrast to the dark generation that he's a part of, there's a glimmer of hope here at the end of Genesis 6, that Noah is going to, as this covenant recipient of God, he is going to do what God commands. Now, that doesn't mean he's perfect. He does sin later on in the narrative, but for now we see obedience in response to the covenant-making and remnant-sparing God. So things end on a good note at the end of chapter 6. We're going to come back to chapter 7 here in a few days. We're going to pause and do a psalm, but thanks for following along so far. We've seen some interesting stuff in Genesis 6.